welcome to today's video. In this video, we are going to work on single-step multiplication and division problems. Evidence-wise, we're going to apply the multiplication and division properties of equality. The rest of it is the same as with addition and subtraction. We're going to isolate our variable, we're going to check our work, and we're going to make sure that we show all of our math thinking. It's incredibly important to show your work. Learning experiences down there. Nothing terribly exciting about that. Let's jump straight into our first examples. So let's solve these problems. We have j divided by 5 is equal to 9, and we have t times 3 is equal to 4. So the first thing to do is exactly the same thing as we did in the previous video. We're going to identify what operation we are doing. Here we see that we are doing division. That means if we want to get rid of the 5, because remember our objective is to get j by itself. To get rid of the 5, we're going to do the reverse. We're going to multiply our equation by 5. Remember, because of the properties of equality, you have to do it to both sides. Things need to be perfectly balanced as always. We can even write a little note to ourselves that we use the multiplication property of equality, and then we go from here. Now, what's slightly different about division and multiplication is that where in addition and subtraction, when you got rid of something, it became 0. Here, it's actually going to become a 1. If we think of this as being 1/5, basically, times 5, that's just going to give us a value of 1. So we're going to end up with 1j is equal to 5 times 9, which is 45. And we know that this 1 we don't really care about, so we can just say that it's j. It's still 1j, we just don't bother writing it because we're lazy mathematicians. So we get that j is equal to 45. That's our solution. We can put it in a circle or put it in a box. And then we should always check our work to make sure it is actually correct. We'll take our 45, put it back into our equation, so 45 divided by 5 should equal 9. What is 45 divided by 5? It's, of course, 9. So 9 does equal 9. We know for a fact that this is true. Amazing. Pause there. Take down these notes. Make sure you write them down. As for the other one, same idea. We're going to start by identifying what operation we're doing. We have multiplication here. So what is the opposite of multiplication? What do we need to do to undo multiplication? Well, the opposite, as we discussed earlier, must be division. And if we want to get rid of this 3, we're going to have to divide it by 3. Again, 3 divided by 3 would just be 1. That's actually what we want in multiplication and division, because we can't get a 0 from those. We should end up with a 1. Due to the properties of equality, we're going to make sure that we do it to the other side. What you do to one side, you must do to the other side. So we divide this by 3 as well. So we are left with 1t. I'm just going to go ahead and write t here, because we know from our previous example that we can just do that. And 4 divided by 3, that's a little bit trickier. There are a couple different ways we could write this. We could either write it as a fraction, so 4/3. That's fine. Remember, division and fractions are the same thing. So we could write it like that. We could also write it as a mixed number, in which case it would be 1 and 1/3. Review your notes from when we did mixed numbers if you're wondering how we got that. We could also write this as a decimal, in which case we would actually have to do 4 divided by 3 and see what we get. Just to save some time, we'd get 1.3, and that 3 would be repeating forever and ever and ever. So any of these 3 answers would be fine. It just depends on how you prefer to write it. Depending on what kind of problem you're working on, one version might be better than the other. You just have to think about the context. Again, we should check our work, but just for the length of this video, we're going to know that we did this correctly. For these you-do problems, you have 2s is equal to 4 and f divided by 4 is equal to 8. You're going to have to figure out what each of those values is. Use the properties of equality. Use that method. Again, it is very, very useful, so when we get to a harder problem, you know how to approach it. Remember that 2s, there is an operation there. You have to think of what it could be, though. Good luck. Give it a try. Pause the video now. Things to remember from this video. Make sure you show the steps you do. Don't just do it in your head. Again, once we get a harder question, like maybe, 3x plus 1 is equal to 15, how are you going to do that? By showing your work. That's the best way to approach it. I just made this one up, and I can solve it almost immediately because I am showing my work.
Wow.
Always do the opposite of what you see. If you see multiplication, use the division property of equality. Divide both sides by the same number. If you see division, then you're going to use multiplication. And finally, check your work when you're done to make sure that your work is actually accurate. Did your number end up being the thing you think it is? Best way to do. You can even do this with more challenging problems, which is what you're seeing on the screen right now. Although I'm not going to go into all the details about what is happening. You can pause it if you'd like to have a look and write it down. Totally optional. So yeah, not too bad. It's basically the same thing as in the previous video, just with division and multiplication this time. So finally, it's time for our suggested practice problems. Just like in the previous video, you have your choice of which difficulty to do. Normal is what I expect you to be able to do. So if you just want to practice the basics, do normal, that's fine. Hard is a little bit harder. You'll notice everything in there is either a decimal or a fraction, or we'll end up giving you some sort of fraction, except for maybe one of them. Finally, lunatic. That first row is actually the same row as the bottom of hard, but the second row in lunatic is all two-step equations. You're going to have to use two different properties of equality to get your variable by itself. Give them a try, see what you can come up with. Good luck.